Good. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists. Sorry for the delay, but we're here now. So, Ryan, do you want to start by introducing yourself today?
Yeah, I'm Ryan Pankau. I'm the horticulture educator here out of Champaign County, so I cover several counties right here around Champaign. And I guess the thing we realized we haven't probably told you guys is some of our specialties. So we're going to talk today about just kind of what our areas of specialty are. So for me, it's forestry and arboriculture. So forestry and arboriculture is like the care of trees, so individual trees. I'd say also native plants are another area I have expertise in. And then finally, vegetable gardening is probably just out of personal interest, something that I know a lot about or do a lot of. So probably my other area of interest or specialty. So
Awesome. Kelly?
Yes, I am Kelly Allsup, and I am a horticulture educator based out of Bloomington and serve Livingston, McLean, and Woodford in those areas. My specialty is entomology. I love talking about beneficial insects, garden pests, tree pests, butterflies. I'm good at identifying butterflies. And then, like Ryan, I like to talk about vegetables too because I myself grow vegetables a lot. And I love growing flowers too, but probably Candice is your lady for the flowers. So,
Excellent. And I'm Candice Hart. I'm a horticulture educator in Macon, DeWitt, and Piatt County, so also kind of central Illinois here, and also interim state master gardener coordinator. And I would call myself the flower lady, so I don't grow vegetables, not a fan. I eat them, but I don't grow them. I pretty much devote all of my space to flowers, whether it's cut flowers or just annuals, perennials. So yeah, flowers and any kind of home horticulture topic is what I tend to answer.
He can be the tree guy, I can be the bug lady, and you can be the flower lady.
Yeah, works for me. Get our t-shirts made.
Okay.
Okay, so I have the first show and tell we're going to talk about today before we get into some questions. So if you have gardening questions, start typing those into the comment box, and we'll kind of answer those as they come in. We've got a few to answer that came in ahead of time. So I cut a couple of things to bring today from the garden to talk about kind of fall perennials and things that are looking great in the fall garden. So, of course, this big guy here, this pink one, is a sedum. This is Autumn Joy sedum. And I think most gardeners, a lot of gardeners, have this in their perennial garden because it's super tough perennial. Really easy to grow. It's succulent, so you really doesn't need a lot of water. It's really heat and drought tolerant, so that's a really easy, great one. And Kelly, so mine is covered with these little brown butterflies most of the day this time of year. What are those called, you said?
Those are called silver spotted skippers, and I too have noticed quite an abundance of those lately. So I love sedum because the bees and the butterflies all love them, and so we've had a great year for butterflies. Those of you who have butterfly flowers in your garden, you've probably noticed.
Yeah. The other one that I've noticed a lot of those skippers on is my agastache, which is flowering right now as well. Agastache is actually the herb of the year next year, so you'll be seeing a lot of info about agastache coming out soon. And then I just cut a couple of other things that are looking good this time of year. Ruston sage has kind of that silvery foliage and bluish flowers. Also has a nice fragrance to it. Grasses are usually starting to kind of come into their prime this time of year. So this is my favorite grass of all time, northern sea oats. I love it just because of these seed heads that kind of blow in the
really cool
the
seed
wind.
heads.
Yeah, I love those seed heads. Prairie drop seed is having some seed heads in my garden now too. So a lot of grasses are.
Those are a couple
putting
natives.
Up seed heads. Yeah, great natives too. Black-eyed Susan's just kind of finishing up its flowering, but of course it looks great with that fall kind of color scheme. And lamb's ear. I had to bring some lamb's ear because I love lamb's ear. This cultivar is called Helene von Steen. So if you've planted lamb's ear before and you're kind of like, I hate lamb's ear because it's really aggressive, which if you get just the straight species lamb's ear, it is kind of aggressive, but Helene von Steen kind of has bigger leaves to it. It doesn't flower, and it's a lot more contained. So if you haven't had success with lamb's ear before, try a cultivar, and it's a little bit nicer.
And that's the perennial plant of the year.
Yeah, it was.
Not this particular?
Not this year, but next. Yeah, I think the cultivar humulo, which is a Stakey's, a lamb's ear, is the perennial plant of the year next year. So herb of the year, plant of the year, that's,
From a novice flower gardener, what I've noticed about my anise hyssop is I have to cut it back.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it overseeds heavily.
Yeah.
So, just from a person who's had it overseed in her garden pretty heavily, still a wonderful plant. I would never rip it out, but, trimming those flowers back in the fall probably would help you out.
Yeah. Or if you're like myself and you can use it as a cut flower, so you can use it like in a vase or bouquet, so you can cut those flowers back, enjoy it, but then
I'm
also
this combination is
good
gorgeous.
Color combo. It is. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into some questions because there's some coming into the chat box, but we had a couple that came in ahead of time. So we have a question from Faith. When should lettuce be planted in the fall? Vegetable people, what is the time?
Well, it depends on what your goal is. Like a succession planting is great in fall, where every week or so you plant another row, so then you have lettuce to harvest over a big chunk of the fall. As far as the latest planting date, I don't know. Like, what would it take for a lettuce crop to mature? That's you kind of have to look at your frost.
The seed packet, but like 45 days, 30 days?
Yeah,
some of those faster.
I'm a huge fan of baby greens, so 3 inches or less. I think it tastes best. And I think you could have that in 45 to 30 days. And then plus, our first frost day is supposed to be around the middle of October. But that's just supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then lettuce has this cold hardiness to it. So it may not even be nipped at that point in time and still grow.
And I think a lot of my fall gardening, I kind of bank on the fact we might have a little bit warmer of a fall. And some years it works, some years it doesn't. But I try and plant stuff so I have things there and ready if we do get that little warm streak, or it stays warmer a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do as it gets colder is protect it with floating row cover or something to keep the frost off and just nurse it along a little bit past a few of those real cold spots we get. So really, right now is a great time to start some. And really for the next, I don't know, several weeks, all the way up to about the start of October, I guess you're kind of getting a little late about the start of October. But so this month of September is a great time to start some fall lettuce.
I'm planting Swiss chard and kale right now. And both of those are a little bit more cold hardy than just your lettuce grains.
Yeah. I really need to get some kale planted. That's something I've been meaning to do. And some years when we do have just a little bit milder of weather, you can have kale all the way through till spring. It just kind of depends on our winter, but especially further south of here in southern Illinois, I've had kale in January down there. So planting kale is a great thing to do because you can continually harvest it if you carefully harvest the leaves. You can keep it going for quite a while.
We've had kale in January here too.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but it gets better with a little exposure to cold.
Yeah, the cool temperature helps the flavor, which is awesome. Yeah, cool.
Actually, the cold causes the plants to produce more sugars. So what does more sugar mean? Better flavor.
Better flavor and less opportunity for that water in the leaves to freeze. So that's what the plant's trying to do, is concentrate some sugars in there and bring that freezing temperature down a little bit.
I'm getting all scientific on us here. Okay, so another question here. I see a lot coming into the comments. That's awesome. Keep them coming. We have a question from Megan that came in ahead of time. How do I not kill my cacti? And I'll take that one because I just had a workshop last night at Ellerton that we talked about this exact thing.
Okay.
Really, your best tactic is to not overwater. That's probably why you killed it. That's how a lot of people kill cacti or succulents, is you water them like a typical houseplant. And they don't need that. You want to make sure to let the soil dry out all the way before watering again. Give it a really thorough watering and then let it totally dry out. So stick your finger in there. If it still feels moist, don't water again. And also light too. That's typically the second factor. If it doesn't have a bright enough window, like a southern or western window, then that can slowly kill that cacti too. So
yeah, they need a lot of light.
Yeah, a lot of water and a lot of light, very limited water, I should say.
Candice, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed that some people, like when they they'll have their plants outside during the summer, and then they want to bring them in the fall, and they try to pot them up at that point to make them into a more decorative container. And really potting up houseplants in the fall is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
You should wait and do that in the spring. And succulents and cacti tend to like those small, shallow pots and like to be root bound.
Too much soil is going to stay wet for a longer period of time, which a cacti or succulent's not going to like. So if anything, keep them a little more pot bound, and even use a clay pot, which is porous. It kind of dries out faster. Yeah, but usually watering is your biggest thing that happens. Yeah. Okay, great question about cacti. We'll take one more here ahead of time, and then we'll get to our comments. So Heidi has a couple of questions. She's looking for some good shrub or perennial choices for dry shade. Her trees have grown. It used to be a sunny spot, then part shade. Now it's dry shade. So she has a area that's really shady and dry, and wants to know what she can put in there, because what she's got now requires a lot of water. So what do you guys think?
It's definitely a question for you, but before Candice answers this question, just know that, you may put in a drought-tolerant plant for dry, but in that establishment period, that first 1 to 2 years, you're still going to have to water. You're going to have to take care of those plants.
For sure.
So, just so you know, you have to be really, you can... First 2 years, you got to take care of them. Then you can start neglecting them and be okay with the whole drought tolerance of it.
Yeah. So I would say I would classify my shade garden as relatively dry shade as well. And I of course have the typical hosta in there to kind of fill space because they're pretty large. And once a hosta is established, they definitely don't need additional watering typically in most seasons. So they'll definitely tolerate some dry shade. But the other one that I like a lot for dry shade is actually lungwort. Lungwort has a really cool speckled foliage to it, and also really beautiful pink to blue flowers in the spring. I was just talking about this the other day in Perennials Master Gardener training, that's a really great one for dry shade. But yeah, really, I found once most of them are established, they're going to tolerate that pretty well. The one to avoid would be like a stilby. A stilby is really a moist shade lover. Other than that, though, I found most shade plants to be fairly adaptable.
Now, my favorite shade shrub is Fothergilla.
I didn't talk about shrubs.
Shade?
I think it'd be pretty tolerant.
Probably not like full shade.
Yeah, but some part shade.
Some part sun. It would work well, and that is just one of my favorite shrubs for its flowering and fall colors. It's got really neat flowers.
And I'm trying to think what else. I have some oak leaf hydrangea in that kind of part shade garden, and it does pretty good.
Yeah, some of the hydrangeas. A good native is spice bush. It does really well in shade. And the thing I like about it's not a super showy flower, but it's really early in spring. It's one of the first things, in spring to start to flower, and little tiny yellow flowers all over it. Produces a berry that then birds can eat and other things. So has a wildlife value. It's native. You see it in woodlands around here a lot. So.
I think a native shrub would be a great way to go because most of them will take part shade.
And natives tend to be a little more adaptable too to varying moisture conditions and stuff. So So you got options. Okay, keep the questions coming. We got a lot to get to here. So Heidi has a question here. She has milkweed this year and monarchs. Is it really a good thing to save the caterpillars? And I'm trying to expand her question, but it doesn't want to let me. Sorry, Heidi.
It's been a great year for monarchs.
It has been a great year. I'm assuming she's asking, is it a great idea to save them and kind of rear them on your own? But I can't get it to open. So we were just talking about that. Do you want to talk about that?
I was just talking about that at our house. We've done a bunch this year. This has been our biggest year of monarch rearing, and I think we're up around 50 now for the year that we've reared and successfully released as adults. It is a good thing to do because, believe it or not, we can provide sometimes a better place for those caterpillars to mature. There's a lot of things that either eat them or pathogens that infect them in the wild, and reduces their chances of survivability if we just let them be out in nature. Which is some of the reason why we've seen the large decline in monarchs. They have a hard time out there. But I always say to folks, and Kelly can probably speak to this a little bit as well, it's something you do need to educate yourself about and learn about. And I can't take the credit in our household for doing all the initial education. My wife has learned a ton about it and really got us up and going, and my kids love to participate in it. I mean, it's a great activity, but you do need a continual supply of milkweed. That's probably the biggest challenge. It's just to have milkweed in your area you can harvest and bring in, because those growing caterpillars really eat a lot. But if nothing else, I would suggest you maybe try it once just to see the process happen. And it doesn't have to be a monarch. There's other native caterpillars that you can rear the same way with equal success. I know black swallowtails are maybe one.
Yeah, they're my favorite.
Could you name a few other? Is there others, or that's one I know is easy?
Well, ones that I've noticed, and that those are the two most common that people see and play with. But one thing that I've noticed is I've noticed a lot of Gulf fritillary. I've noticed a lot of course, I'm having a moment, so I will skip past that. But my favorite thing about monarchs is I love growing the annual milkweed. And if you haven't grown that one and you really are into monarchs, that is like an excellent plant. They actually prefer it over the natives. And it actually stays in flower longer, which is of great benefit to the adults. Because actually, there's the Illinois Natural History Survey with David Zaya did some work and found that it wasn't necessarily the lack of milkweed that was causing the decline, even though he's right, parasites and diseases get the milkweed caterpillars. But it was actually they have a lack of floral resources in the fall. And so one thing that you could do if you really truly love monarchs is you could plant some of these plants that Candice brought in today.
Yeah.
These would be perfect in the garden, because if you see right now, the monarchs the adults are going to your flowers.
Yeah.
They're trying to source the nectar, and they have how many mile journey that they have to make?
Oh gosh, all the way down to Mexico. 1,000 miles, maybe more. I used to know the number on that, but a long journey.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Great question. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of monarchs this year. I was somewhere this weekend and they had annual milkweed. They had like a tropical milkweed and their front landscape, and it was just bare stems. It was
all my tropical milkweed bare. All my perennial milkweed bare. I just kind of cut it back to a node, which is where the leaf meets the stem, so that it could kind of rebound a little bit.
Leaf out again a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, they did.
But that's a good sign. That shows
that's good. I mean, that's what you want.
Insects are using it.
Yeah, you want.
Same with the parsley. People will be like, oh, what are those parsley worms that I have, and what do I spray on it? I'm like, don't spray. Those are black swallowtails. Do we really need that much parsley? So if you if you plant parsley, plant a couple of extra plants, because you'll have those wonderful black swallowtails on them.
Exactly. Okay, guys, keep the questions coming in the comment box. We've got a question here from Lauren. Any idea what disease might have affected my black-eyed Susans this year? The stems and some of the leaves turned black after the flowers were up for a while. Yep, that happens almost every year on a lot of black-eyed Susan. It's a fungal leaf spot disease. I can't remember the particular one off the top of my head. But yeah, you tend to get those black spots in the leaf. It never kills the plant. The leaves just kind of look unsightly towards the end of the season. So what I tend to do is just cut those plants back at the end of the season and remove the leaf. So don't compost it. Kind of take it away so that hopefully it doesn't overwinter as much. And you could use a preventative fungicide on that, but I don't think it's warranted, because it happens so late in the season, and it doesn't really affect the health of the plant that much. So I just
it's not going to kill your
it's not going to kill your Susan. You could try to kind of prune out and thin out the plant a little bit to increase the air movement, and that might help a little bit. But it happens almost every year, so it's fairly common. So I wouldn't worry too much, Lauren.
And that's the stuff that I'm a big about insects. So where do you think the insects are overwintering? They overwinter right here in Illinois, and they're overwintering in your garden. And so if you start cutting back all the plants in your garden, then they have nowhere to go. Or if you start cleaning up all the leaves everywhere, they have nowhere to hide out. Mm-hmm. So that would be the only reason that I would even cut anything back in my garden during the fall, is if it had a disease like powdery mildew or this leaf spot. Yeah. So, think about leaving these plants going for the fall.
Yeah, I do. At least it's something to look at in the winter then, too.
Well, you need to view it as valuable winter wildlife habitat. Yeah. Although they're not crawling around and doing things, it is a valuable habitat structure they need in your yard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so only cut back the disease stuff, if you can. Okay, Jane has a question here about squash. She wants to use covers for her squash to keep out the squash bugs. Will I have to self-pollinate? Other ideas? What do you think?
Take the cover off when the flowers are on.
Yep, I think that's your best.
Yeah, so early on you can cover it, to prevent the initial infestation from the squash bug. But yeah, so then once it flowers, you can pull it off.
Yeah.
You know what my secret is to squash bugs? Don't grow squash.
Some gardeners will plant. Is there a certain type of squash that's more susceptible?
Hubbard squash.
Hubbard. Yeah.
Hubbard, they'll plant Hubbard squash next to their zucchini, and the squash bugs will go to the Hubbard squash, and you can either spray those or just get rid of the Hubbard squash. Some gardeners do late season planting, meaning they'll plant later in July to prevent the egg lay, but still can have problems. But I would suggest planting as soon as the frost is over, and just covering them. And then once they flower, uncover them, and hopefully you won't build up that huge population. Yeah. Another thing is scouting. Go out there. If there's leaves that have eggs on them,
you can
get rid of those eggs. Are they the bright red? Is that squash bugs?
They're kind of like orangish brownish.
You can really find the eggs. I've had really good luck that way. You have to be down there in the leaves, dealing with it on a daily basis almost.
Yeah. In the first couple of weeks that you uncover it, if you just went out there and found the eggs or the nymphs like to congregate with each other. So you turn them over, they're all together, and you could,
squish them.
You could squish them or do some insecticidal soap on that.
Or drop them in a thing of soap.
Yeah.
So I've done that exact scouting of trying to find the eggs and trying to find the nymphs and just trying to deal with it that way. Just because it got ahead of me.
Yeah, you got to stay on top of it.
I let them get my infestation happen. But yeah, that's a great fix.
And I didn't really explain my joke. I joked, don't grow squash. But if you took a couple of years off, you'd be surprised.
That's true.
At how well that can work for you. Just take a couple years off of the whole insect pressure. They start moving out of your garden, and then grow squash again.
Go to the farmer's market, buy the squash, and then...
Or maybe your neighbor just has a raging squash patch.
That too.
It's usually if somebody has a lot of squash, they have a lot of it. So
or they have squash, they have a lot of it.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Okay, great squash question. Next question is from Chris. So keep adding those questions to the comment box. Chris wants to know, what should I be doing to prepare my newly planted trees for winter? Ryan, tree guy?
That's a good question. Definitely having a nice layer of mulch. What that's going to do is protect the soil profile from freezing real deep. That could freeze some roots or stress it out a little bit. As your leaves go into leaf drop this fall, so as they get close to dropping their leaves, making sure there's plenty of water. And a lot of times in that part of the fall, we do have plenty of rainfall, and so it's not a big deal. But if we're having a dry fall, keeping them well watered, so that's about 1 inch to 2 inches a week or so is what you should provide. So that's going to help that plant shut down for the year. So store away all the energy in the leaves and shut down for the year, and not have any interruption from some drought stress in there. So those are probably the two major things you can do. I'm assuming you've picked the right spot, so it's not a super exposed spot and things. I have seen where if it is a really exposed spot and windy, and we get that a lot, or especially in the rural areas around here where there's a lot of cornfields that can let air, wind get moving a lot. Some bales of hay around them in the wintertime. And I guess that really applies more for conifers or something that have its leaves through the winter. So I'm assuming you're talking about native deciduous trees or deciduous trees of some kind. But for anything that keeps its leaves, whether it's a broadleafed evergreen or a needle-bearing evergreen, that's another trick to nurse it through the transplant shock period. Yeah. So every tree goes through that for 2 to 3 years, or sometimes even longer, depending on the conditions and the size of the plant when it was planted. So you just have to know you're going to be nursing it along for the first couple years. But just as far as general things to do, that's the best I can recommend, is getting some good mulch on it. You may need to reapply if it's really packed down or it's washed away over the course of the season, and then making sure if it's dry, we're watering going into the leaf drop.
Yeah, I like that straw bale idea. I know a lot of gardeners will do kind of a burlap corral kind of around the outside to kind of block some wind, but the straw bales is a good idea.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's a really good idea.
If they're small, it's easy. You kind of stack them up, but you might only need one side that's the windward side.
Yeah, whichever the wind's.
And you might not be able to get it quite as tall as the whole plant, but you're still protecting a good amount of that canopy, and you're stopping some of that wicking action that happens.
Yeah, because you'll know when you get winter burn in the spring is you'll have brown needles. You'll know. So you do want to protect from that cold winter winds. Excellent question. Okay, question from Dorothy here. When can I split my hosta? Now is great. So fall is actually a great time to divide a lot of perennials, and it's actually preferred for some of them, like peonies and iris and daylilies. But honestly, with hosta, I do a lot of my splitting in the spring, just as the leaves are starting to come out of the ground, just because you can still see kind of how big the plant is, but you're not dealing with all that big foliage everywhere. So I tend to do it the most in the spring because it's a little easier to handle, but you can do it in the summer as long as you're watering well, and you can do it now as well. And just, again, make sure you water well to get them established before winter. But
yeah, I mean, I've done it throughout the growing season. Oh, yeah,
for sure.
It's just a matter of how much you want to water or not water. And that's a great point of dealing with the foliage. I mean, just the prime time is when they're little tiny...
Yeah, they're just coming out of the ground. You can see how big it is.
Yeah, they'll do great in the fall.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, do it now. Don't wait too long. Like towards the end of the month. Now is good. But the closer we get to freezing temperatures, and we want time to get some good roots established. So
I just did some research on this particular topic, and I found that a lot of the spring perennials they suggested to, divide now.
Yeah. Which is a good idea, because if you divide it in the spring, you're going to throw off your flowering. Like, you're going to miss the prime season. So, like peonies, that's why we say do it in the fall, because if you divide them in the spring, you're going to mess up the prime season of...
You're disrupting their...
Yeah, which is not going to kill it. You're just going to miss your flowering.
And there were a few no-nos, like ornamental grasses, or, some things like butterfly weed, which you would never divide.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think about the root system, right? Like, butterfly weed does not like to be transplanted or moved, so you wouldn't really want to divide it ever, really, if you didn't have to. Yeah. Okay, great question, Dorothy. Let's see. Diane is trying to get rid of rows of Sharon seedlings. Well, good luck to you, Diane. Suggestions for Diane. Honestly, hand pulling is
that's what I was
probably your best tack. Because more than likely, you probably have a rose of Sharon shrub, and they've dropped kind of into the landscaping below that. So I know what I've done in the past is just pulled those out of the landscaping. If it was just a single shrub and it was a bare area beneath, you could probably do some herbicide and kind of fill that area. But to be honest, what I did in my mom's landscaping is we actually got rid of the rose of Sharon because it spread. It was just too much to maintain, so we actually removed it. But yeah, I would say hand pulling.
Yeah, I think hand pulling, getting them really small, doing it on a day where the soil's a little bit moist, easier to pull. But that's how I've managed it in the past, is just with hand pulling. I mean, I know it's work.
It's just, and that's just what they do. Rose of Sharon,
in my landscape, what I'm dealing with right now is sweet autumn clematis. And I know master gardeners just love this beautiful vine that's just covered in white.
Hey, there's something to be said for its flowering.
I like it.
And Ryan knows why I don't like it. And it has invasive qualities, so I don't want to mess up our natural areas here in Illinois with a landscape plant, so I would not suggest planting it. But it's everywhere in my landscape. Everywhere. Let me tell you, everywhere. There are little vines everywhere.
Well,
in the shrubs.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get the question of a picture, what is this? Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. It's
we've been getting a lot of white flowering vine, smells really good, sweet autumn clematis, you guys. A potential really is on the invasive list.
It's really invasive. Yeah. I mean, it's really not a good one to have, especially close to natural areas. If you just want a raging infestation in your yard, you're not close to a natural area, that's maybe the place to do it. But it's really invasive. It's not a great one.
I think that's why master gardeners love it, because it's so easy to grow.
It is. And mine
it will fill a trellis.
Mine stays nicely contained for the time being. We'll see how it does. Yeah.
So interesting side note on that, there's different pronunciations of clematis.
Oh, yeah?
If you talk to somebody from the East Coast, it's clematis.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of like that example because it's a good reason why we need scientific names.
Oh, yeah.
I know I'm getting worse. The older I get, the worse I'm getting at communicating in scientific names. But a common name can not only be totally different, but it can just be pronounced differently, and it makes it difficult to communicate with others as to what plant we're talking about. So.
Very true. Use those scientific names.
Because if you put us on the East Coast, we would be clueless.
Yeah, right.
We might know what family it is just because of our background, but we would be like, what plant is this?
Yes.
It would almost be a good thing because we'd be like kids in a candy store.
Well, it'd be fun to learn a whole new system
new
of plants.
Language, well, good luck, Diane, with those Rose of Sharon seedlings. Next up, we have a question from Laura. She has powdery mildew on her squash and tomatoes. She wants to know, can it live in the soil? Should I not plant those next year?
Well,
it actually overwinters on plant material, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So as long as you clean up all of the foliage from those plants and get it out of that garden, it shouldn't overwinter in that particular spot. That doesn't mean that you won't get it again next year, though.
I think another thing I would look for is like a neighboring source. Mm-hmm. Is there some place that it came from, a woody plant or something around your yard or area? So that's probably the other key to it. But just getting all that plant material out is the biggest thing.
Another thing could be the way you water.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you're watering late at night, if you come home after work and water, and that's the majority of and you water overhead with like a hand hose, you're causing the problem yourself. You could either put in irrigation or water in the morning, and that could prevent it. I would never plant squash and tomatoes in the same spot again in the garden where I had powdery mildew. That's just, I clean up my garden really, really well, clean it up. I mean, I know we were talking about not cleaning up.
Yeah, but in the vegetable
garden, you clean up that garden really, really well. This could also be a great time for you to do a soil test to figure out how your soil is doing for your gardening. Mm-hmm. Or you could particularly do your tomatoes in a, like a straw bale or a huge container and get them up off the ground, and that could potentially help too.
Yeah.
And then I love pruning my tomatoes. I know a lot of people don't do it, but do you prune your tomatoes?
I don't grow tomatoes.
Oh, yeah.
I've started to do it more in recent years.
But I know a lot of people do.
Actually, our educator in service to the Dixon Spring Ag Center, we all met there and looked at a lot of their vegetable production, and I noticed they really prune their tomatoes, and I went home after that and gave ours a good pruning. But it just gets a nice amount of airflow through there and just really helps with a lot of issues. So
when you prune your tomatoes, you know that, okay, let's say Ryan's arm is the stem, you have a leaf, and then you always have that little growth right there in between the leaf, at the leaf axil, and you just pinch that out. Yep. And then you just keep pinching that out, and then sometimes you don't let it go crazy and have multiple vines. Okay.
You can put your vine down.
Done pruning my arm.
And you don't, and so I don't even do that throughout the whole season. I just do that like the first 4 to 5 weeks. I'll get out there and prune it down.
Because you don't necessarily need all of that vine.
No.
Like, you don't need all that.
And actually it says that you actually will decrease your tomato a little bit, but you get larger tomatoes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that really matters to, I get enough tomatoes off of a tomato plant.
You're good.
So that could help with that.
Well, good question, Laura. So luckily, it's not going to be in your soil, but you need to clean up really well and rotate like you would anyways. Okay, question from Jane. Can I put straw over my flower garden to prevent weeds over the winter? I don't want to plant any grass. Yeah, straw you can definitely use as a mulch on the vegetable garden, flower garden.
I think my favorite is wood chips.
Yeah.
I've just always used wood chips a lot. I kind of started my career as an arborist, so we had a lot of wood chips. But yeah, straw works great too. I mostly use straw in my vegetable garden. I mostly use wood chips in my flower ornamental gardens and landscaping.
And it kind of depends on like what kind of flower garden you're talking about, Jane. Like if you have a bed that you plant with annuals every year, like you just fill it with geraniums or something like that, then I think straw is probably a good choice because then you could work that in really easily. But if it's like a perennial flower garden, then I would definitely do something longer lasting, like wood chips. Yeah.
Yeah, and one way I've used straw, and I've done this in vegetable gardening that works pretty well, is instead of sprinkling it out and kind of letting it just kind of layer itself, if you kind of pull that bale apart in thin strips, you can lay them down as a mat. Now you have to have a lot of straw to do that, but I've done that under tomatoes a lot. That just is just a really great weed barrier. So that's a way you can get just a real thick layer of straw out there.
And if you have really bad weeds, cardboard under your mulch.
Cardboard or thick layer of newspaper.
Yeah, I've tried this, and it is like the best thing for not letting weeds get up through there, because it doesn't matter. You could lay down thick mulch and still have a few weeds every now and then, but some of those weeds that are hard to get rid of, like bindweed, putting down cardboard is the way to go.
Yeah, cardboard is really effective. I mean, I've seen it. I've used it myself. I've seen it really work great.
I myself am I have mulch on my perennial garden from the spring, but I myself am going to use my fall leaves this year to mulch my beds a little bit more. So I want to use my fall leaves. I don't want to put all this organic matter out on the trash, out on the street. Bloomington, you just put the leaves on the street. They come by and they vacuum them up. So I am going to keep all my leaves, and I want to put it back in my landscape. So I'm going to mulch them up a little bit. They're probably not going to prevent frost heaving, but they're going to add to the soil till
all good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the leaves of urban areas are an often overlooked resource, because that's really the way that trees cycle nutrients. Those leaves are full of nutrients that when they decompose, that can be added to your soil very easily. So if you think about a forest, a natural functioning forest, we don't ever need to add any fertilizer or anything. It all happens in that in those leaf structures, the nutrient cycling that happens. So all of those leaves that you're taking off of your site, that's a bunch of nutrients that are leaving. So in Kelly's case, it's great to grab some of that and put it back into our landscaping bed. So I do that in various spots around our place.
And that's actually a really good segue to one of our farther down questions. Lauren asked, she's heard leaf mulch is really great for gardens, but where the heck do you get it? Do you just rake your leaves onto again, it doesn't show me the whole comment, but I think she's asking, do you just rake your leaves onto the beds? Or if you don't have trees in your landscape, where do you get leaf mulch?
You could go over them with a lawn mower. That'll cut them up a little bit. They'll start composting, because if you just put big sycamore leaves, it's gonna cause some water issues. I actually
they blow around a little bit when they're full leaves that don't stack.
So you really want to break them down into smaller size, and then you could then rake them into the bed or.
And then when she's talking about leaf mulch, is she talking about leaf mold? Because I'll put leaves in trash cans in my garage, and then I'll use that as my carbon for my composting.
Yeah, excellent.
So I just keep that in a because when you're in the winter and you're still composting and you have all of the nitrogen that we're putting in there, the fresh stuff, then you don't have the grasses, the twigs, the leaves that you might have throughout the season. So I keep that and put that on, and it helps keep my compost, how do I say, fresher,
active,
actively composting.
Well, keeping the process going. But
awesome.
You mentioned kind of mowing it, and that works really well if you just let a lot of the leaves fall in your yard and mow all one direction.
Yeah.
You can kind of sort them all to one spot of your yard and then kind of finish by raking.
Get them
and
broken down.
I've found like just the absolute best tool for moving leaves around is one of those big blue tarps that you can kind of stand with your feet and rake between your legs, right under the tarp, and then if you just take the two corners, you can drag that wherever you want it to go, and that's my major leaf raking tool that I use.
Yeah, and Lauren, if you don't have a lot of trees, check with your city composting side or your city landscape recycling. I'm sure they would have some that they could
I would think you might have some neighbors that would donate.
I think you could drive down the street and see some leaf bags, and they'd be like, okay.
Okay.
I actually did that a little bit.
Did you really get some more leaves?
Well, yeah, because I
find
it really valuable for me with the composting that I really need those leaves during the winter.
Yeah.
So
feel free to come over anytime. I have a ton.
Well, I know where to get my leaves this
okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, so feel free to keep adding questions, and we'll try to get to all of these. Lauren asked, we were talking about perennials earlier, any other perennials not to divide or move? What do you guys think? I'm trying to think of any others that don't like being moved.
I just put, it's on I put it on my blog. I'm not trying to promote my blog.
Did you do a blog post about this?
I did.
Perfect.
I'm going to put it on today. It's supposed to go on today or tomorrow. And my blog is called Flowers, Fruits, and Frass. And so I did write particularly about this topic. It's hard for me to remember exactly which ones was not supposed to be.
Baptisia is one I can think of. There's a couple of natives that actually have more of like a tap root system that don't like being moved.
Do you know whose book that in this research that I really got into was the Tracy d'Arbato book?
Now who's that? Sorry.
We linked it a couple times ago. We talked about this before. Okay. I can't remember what it's called.
It's we'll
add it in the comments because I have it on my bookshelf. But it has a lot of great information about perennial maintenance.
I know. She'll just say.
Is it like the well-maintained perennial
garden?
Yeah, the well-maintained perennial garden. Tracy D something. I can't remember.
Arboto or something like this. Yeah. She is incredible with telling you exactly when you should divide something, what you should do, when you should cut it back. And so I really delved into her book for this research. But if you want to buy a book and you love perennials, it is an excellent book. It is a perfect Christmas present.
Yeah. And we'll try to add that later to the comments.
Then my blog, I can usually Erin, the lady who runs this Facebook page, will link to some of my articles, so I'm sure she'll link to that in the next week or two.
Yeah, we can share that. Yep. Perfect. Okay, we've got a couple of cover crop question here. Jane wants to know a good cover crop for the winter vegetable garden, and Lauren is asking, is it too late to plant cover crops?
It is.
What do you think?
I think it is.
There's some that you can still plant. It depends on what you want the cover crop to do over winter, too. I'd say a main, just one that I plant a lot is oats. They come up quick. They're not necessarily winter hardy, so they're not going to stay alive or really grow much over the winter. Winter rye is probably the one that you can plant the latest. And it'll stay green all throughout the winter, and it'll start to grow again in the spring. The issue with it is that you're going to have to stop its growth before you plant something in that bed. So you're going to have to kill it one way or another in the spring.
You don't want to let it go to seed.
Don't want it to go to seed. And then another factor is that it has a bit of allelopathy. So chemicals that it releases into the soil that inhibit the growth of other plants. So there is a planting, a space there after you kill the rye, however you do it, that you have to wait a couple weeks before you could put new vegetables or plant anything in that for that allelopathic effect to kind of go away. So those are probably my two biggest recommended.
I just cover cropped maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I did it at a jail garden that I'm working with, and so I did a soil test, and they had a lot of weeds because it was not a garden before. So we did the rye, the first thing you said, we did tillage radishes. But we also found that we have an increased phosphorus in this soil, which you would think phosphorus would be good, but too much can limit your production, and it actually has affected my peppers and my beets and my tomatoes. And so I'm planting arugula and kale. So these are in the brassica family, and what they're supposed to do is pull out some of that phosphorus for me. So, I mean, you could potentially, and not that they wouldn't benefit in every way as far as limiting weeds and tilling helping to the soil tilth. That could be something you do.
That's a really great.
Maybe
that's a great one. And you don't really think of kale as a cover crop, but that's a great use for it.
Yeah, I actually went to our cover crop expert in the state, Grant McCarty, and he came and did a program for our unit. He really talked with me about it, and he has this really great program where he's like, what do you want to do? This is what you plant. This is the, so we actually should do more on cover crops.
Yeah,
so we'll probably think about really promoting that next August. I think August would be the perfect time to promote.
Yeah, I did a cover crops program in August, and it was timed specifically for that timing. So, but just kind of like we've talked about, some of the other crops you could plant in your garden that could be later. You could get a little nicer weather, and it could work. I've done cover crops outside of the recommended range.
Yeah, it all depends on the weather does. Yeah.
One thing I refer people to a lot to kind of get an idea of the date ranges for different species is the Midwest Cover Crop Council has a selection tool for cover crops. And this was probably developed a little more for large-scale agriculture, so, folks doing commercial agriculture. But it relates to our garden because it can you can select by county for the planting dates. You can select by county and by different soil characteristics, and it'll make you a little chart that has all the different cover crop species that it has data on and the relative planting dates for your area. It also can, you can select by a lot of different categories as far as whether you want a nitrogen scavenger or, like Kelly mentioned, the tillage radish, something to break through soil compaction and help with that. If you just want to stop erosion, that's one of the factors. I'm trying to think of what some of the others are, but
prevent weeds.
Prevent weeds, yeah. I would have prevent weeds as one of the categories. So it can really help you dial in your planting date, and it's a great place to start. And I'm trying to think, this may be something we'll need to add to the comments later. But
Aaron linked to their website, the tool.
Okay, nice.
There's another, it's a free PDF, and it was put out by SARE, so Sustainable Ag Research and Education. That's, I think, part of USDA. And I think it's something the title's something along the lines of using cover crops profitably or something along those lines. But it's probably the best guide that I use for cover crops, and it has some little tables that are similar to what you can get from the Midwest Cover Crop tool. That's an online tool you'd have to use, but it has some of the similar information in a similar way where you can look at a lot of those cover crops and see their characteristics in a table, and it can help you kind of select what you might use. So I really recommend that publication. It's a free PDF on the internet you can find, and I go to it a lot when I start to think about cover crops.
Yeah, and I know even if you just go to our website and search cover crops in the search bar, we have quite a bit on our.
We do extension.
A lot of articles and a lot of stuff too.
And that gives a segue to how you can search our website. So if you type in University of Illinois Extension Horticulture, there will be a search bar on the top. And you can type in pretty much any topic you want and find something. Usually Sandy Mason comes up first.
A lot of blog posts.
And Rhonda Faree, because they've been writing for years. But then, sometimes a Kelly Allsup article will show up, or a Home Garden and Pest newsletter article will show up. And you can really get some great information using that search engine. I love it. I use it weekly to find out what my colleagues are writing about or what they've said about a particular topic. So,
well, that's a great recommendation too, because it's for Illinois. So when you go on the internet and start to search, you could get recommendations for California very easily, and not maybe not realize that's what you're getting.
You want it to be local. Yeah. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left, so we're going to take two final questions here that came into the chat box here. Candice has a question about a hydrangea. She has what she thinks is a hydrangea, but she's seen them formed into trees or cut so they remain slow to the ground. And her question's kind of cut off, but I think she's asking how should I get it into that form, basically. So,
like into tree form,
like
or
a topiary form.
Yeah, I think
almost.
to kind of change, and really it's about pruning and kind of getting it. Oh, thanks. Here, for some reason it keeps cutting them off. How should I cut this back? It's probably 8 feet tall, she says. So, tips for pruning a hydrangea?
I would cut it back in the spring. That's when I tell people to cut back hydrangeas in the spring.
Yeah. It sounds like you probably have a panicled hydrangea, like a limelight, one of those type
That is what it sounds like.
One of those type of hydrangeas. And if I remember right, those bloom on, is it new wood or old wood?
It has to be new wood.
I feel like it's new wood. So in that case, then you could prune it back in the spring, or now, really.
Yeah.
And that new growth then would have time enough to grow and then flower for you the next year. The general rule of thumb is don't cut back like more than a third at a time. So I would do kind of a gradual prune this year, kind of see how it looks, and if you need to do another prune, then kind of do it as a slow progress. To go from that big to smaller, just take it slow.
Yeah, but I think the thing you have going for you is, I mean, a lot of these shrubs are pretty hardy. You know, they handle a lot of pruning. So, I mean, it's a very prunable type of plant, so to speak.
I actually would prefer her not prune it back now, because pruning it back now might encourage new growth.
Yeah, now is not actually the greatest time.
Using energy that you want for your flowers, I would encourage her to prune it back in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
not
ideally
that she
even
couldn't.
and ideally even in the dormant season of the spring too. So like March would be a great time while it's still dormant, so that you're not.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about this before. With respect to plant health, pruning during dormancy is probably the best choice you can make.
Exactly.
But in the case where those flowers are on old wood, you're pruning off flower buds essentially. So, with respect to flowering, there's definitely a timing you need to look at. But if you're just worried about plant health, and if you're really worried about reduction in size, I think pruning during dormancy is probably the best recommendation.
Yeah.
And if you have a particular shrub you want to prune, I'd go to that U of I Extension, University of Illinois Extension Horticulture, and say, pruning lilacs, and we'll tell you when to prune them, because he mentioned some shrubs bloom on old wood, some shrubs bloom on new wood. So you don't want to.
And I know we have a lot of articles about hydrangea, because there's so many different kinds of hydrangea, and they all bloom at different times. So.
I bet you Sandy Mason has an article on pruning hydrangea.
That's true. There's some hydrangea with respect to flowering. They flower at different times throughout summer. So. Throughout spring and summer. So I think a key point in this is maybe to identify down the species on your hydrangea.
Yeah, figure out what kind you have. And you can always send us a picture, Janice, and we can help you out.
Yeah.
Okay, final question of the day is about suckers. So Jane wants to know, how do I control suckers growing from the ground around her crabapple? She cut them to the ground and they grow right back. Is the tree planted too shallow? What do you think?
I don't think it's necessarily planted too shallow.
No.
And how I've dealt with suckers on crab apples or apples is just cutting them down as close to the ground as you can, and it's just a maintenance issue with that plant.
It is.
Do you guys have a better?
It seems like some cultivars, they just produce more suckers than others. Like it just.
A lot of times it's a grafted tree, so that's when it's very young. You select one root system and you put a different top on it by either grafting a bud or a small piece of wood to that. So what you're getting from that root system is a different type of tree than the top, most likely. So you definitely don't want to let it grow.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. So you want to keep doing it, but beyond, that you're just going to kind of have to stay on top of it.
I think like 10, 15 years ago, there was this thing in the industry going around where it was something you could spray on those and it would kill those without killing the tree. It didn't work. So you definitely don't want to spray an herbicide on any sprouts, because it's connected to your tree. You'll kill your tree. I have a crabapple. It sprouts. I just prune them back.
I mean, what I've tried to do is just cut them almost down below the soil and then
get as
mulch
low
over
as
that.
Possible.
Try and mulch over that, and I think that discourages that from regrowing. It doesn't always stop it, but that's just been the best combination of things I've been able to find.
Yep, so just stay on top of it.
Unless there's some new cultivar we haven't heard of non-sprouting crab apples.
Yeah,
I don't know
if
either.
Only. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you everyone for the awesome. We had almost too many questions today. We couldn't even get to them all. So if we didn't get to your question, we'll either save it for our next Facebook Live with the Horticulturists, which is in 2 weeks on September 27th. So we'll either save it for then, or we'll try to add it to the chat in the comments. So thank you everyone for the awesome questions. Hopefully
you
got some questions answered and learned a little bit about gardening.
Yeah.
Now go out and garden. We'll see you next time.